All right, today we are tackling a big one. We're jumping into the Quran's longest and most foundational chapter, Surah Al-Baqarah, and we're going to look at it not just for what it says, but for what it was designed to do. So let me ask you a question. Imagine you and your community have just arrived in a new land. You're not a small, persecuted group anymore. You're suddenly in charge. You need laws. You need a shared identity. You need a whole social framework. Seriously, where would you even begin? Well, for the very first Muslims in the city of Medina, this wasn't some thought experiment. It was their reality. And the answer didn't come all at once. It came down piece by piece in real time through the 286 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. You can think of it less like a book and more like a living blueprint for building a nation. So if you've got a blueprint like this, where's the first line you draw? Well, it doesn't start with a law or a big story. It actually starts by mapping out the social landscape, defining who exactly this guidance is for, and, just as importantly, who might push back against it. Right from the get-go, the surah lays out three distinct groups of people. First, you've got the believers, the ones who are ready and willing to listen. Then you have the disbelievers, who are very clear about their rejection. But then there's this third group, a new and tricky element in Medina, the hypocrites. These were people who claimed to be believers on the outside, but were working against the community from within. By spelling this out so clearly, the surah was basically setting the stage for all the challenges and guidance that would be needed to handle this brand new, complex reality. Okay, so before getting into the new rules, the surah takes this long, detailed look backwards. A huge chunk of it is all about the history of a community that came before. But why? Why spend so much time on the past? And this actually brings us to a question a lot of people have. The chapter is called The Cow, which sounds kind of random, right? It's obviously not about a cow, so what's that name all about? Well, the name actually comes from one single, very specific story tucked inside the chapter. And this story isn't the main theme at all, but it acts as this powerful symbol. It's a cautionary tale about how resisting clear instructions with endless arguments can lead a community astray. And that story is just the tip of the iceberg. The surah dives deep into the history of the children of Israel. We're talking their original covenant with God, their incredible escape from Egypt, their huge betrayals like worshiping a golden calf, and this recurring pattern of rejecting the messengers sent to guide them. And here's the crucial part. This wasn't just a history lesson for the sake of it. These were case studies. It was as if God was saying to the new Muslim community, hey, look, here are the successes and, more importantly, the failures of a people who came before you. Pay attention, learn from this, so you don't make the same mistakes. So, after all those lessons from the past, it was time for this new community to forge its own unique identity. And that happened through one of the most dramatic and pivotal commands in the entire story. See, for the first year and a half or so in Medina, when the Muslims prayed, they faced Jerusalem, a holy city for the communities that came before them. But then, the instruction came down from heaven, change the direction of prayer, what's known as the Qibla. From now on, you face the Kaaba in Mecca, the ancient house of worship built by Abraham himself. Now this was a massive shift. It wasn't just about turning a few degrees. This was a theological declaration of independence. It established a unique spiritual center for this new community, totally distinct from everyone else. It was the symbolic birth of the global Muslim Ummah, with its own center of gravity. So, with the history understood and the new identity cemented, the community was finally ready for the next phase of the blueprint, the nuts and bolts, the practical, day-to-day laws that you actually need to run a just and fair society. And the sheer scope of what's covered here is just breathtaking. You've got the founding of major rituals like the fast of Ramadan and the pilgrimage of Hajj. You get detailed laws on everything from marriage and divorce to how inheritance works. There are principles for criminal justice, a whole framework for ethical finance, and even rules about what you can and can't eat. It literally touched on almost every part of a person's life. Let's just zoom in on one quick example: money. The surah draws this incredibly sharp line between legitimate trade, which involves risk and creating value, and usury, or riba, basically profiting from exploitative loans. And it's not just frowned upon. Riba is condemned in the strongest possible way, described as being like declaring war against God and his messenger. This built an ethical economic system right into the society's DNA from day one. Now, here's a number that might seem totally random at first. But trust me, it points to one of the most incredible things about this chapter. 282. That is the number of a single verse. And get this, the longest verse in the entire Quran isn't about some deep theological concept or a ritual. It's about the very practical, down-to-earth importance of writing down your financial contracts to make sure everything is clear and just. If that doesn't scream real-world society building, I don't know what does. So after laying out history, identity, and this massive legal code, how do you possibly wrap up a chapter this big? Well, it doesn't end with one final law. It ends with a prayer. The very last verses are this powerful, humble prayer. It's an admission of our human flaws, a plea for mercy if we forget or make mistakes. It recognizes that even if you have the perfect blueprint, you still need God's help and forgiveness. And in a beautiful full-circle moment, the prayer specifically asks not to be burdened like the communities that came before, the very same ones the chapter spent so much time teaching lessons about. So when you step back, you see this incredible flow. Surah Al-Baqarah moves from identifying who you are, to learning from the past, to forging a new identity, to laying down the law for every part of life, and then it all culminates in a humble prayer for mercy. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If a holy book can really act as a blueprint, what does its very structure, the way it's organized, tell us about the kind of society it's trying to build?